Hello, welcome to video 6. In this one we have just a very quick look at why, if, as I claim, modern monetary economics is so good, did we, in the 1970s, go away from a similar type of economics which had run since the 1930s? Well, first let's look at why any dominant type of economics is discarded. There is a golden rule in economics: each economic theory remains until there are problems it can't solve. Then we ditch it and try something new. The period of classical economics lasted until the Great Depression, and the occurrence of the Great Depression was the problem it couldn't explain. Just prior to the Great Depression, things were going great and everyone was very happy with how things were and were confident that the settings for the economy were just right. Then the Depression set in and put an end to that confidence. There was a while where we were a bit unsure how to do things next, but eventually the ideas of an economist, John Maynard Keynes, rose to prominence and countries started implementing his economic recommendations. This period of economics is named after him and called Keynesian economic period. Things went very well in the period of Keynesian economics, and the post-war economies around the world made many improvements. In the 1970s, Keynesian economics ran into a problem, a thing known as stagflation. Unfortunately, Keynes died in the 1940s, so he wasn't around to recommend a solution. Stagflation was thought to be impossible by Keynes, given that in all previous history, inflation only occurred when there was high economic growth, never when there was low growth. But nevertheless, that was what happened in the 1970s, high inflation at a time of low growth. After the 1970s, we implemented a new version of economics. However, it wasn't particularly new. It was simply a modified and updated version of the old classical economics that existed prior to the Great Depression. That form of economics exists to this day. Now we're having problems again with economies around the world, and it is possible that we will again change economics to a new version. So let's have a look at the change from Keynesianism to new classical economics in more detail. I guess I should warn that although I've said in more detail, this is still just a basic breakdown of what happened, and I only mentioned two of the largest problems in the economy. In reality, there were 24 or so noteworthy issues bubbling in the 1970s economy. The cause of the problem, stagflation, as promoted by the people pushing to change from Keynesian economics to the new classical economics, was that a lack of market liberalisation was freezing up markets and causing a slowdown coupled with high prices. This means they thought that some ineffective producers were being protected, and propping them up meant a poor performing economy. It was similar with foreign trade. Some of our markets were protected, meaning that we were getting inferior and higher cost products. The solution that was implemented at the time was to remove these protections and let things self-adjust and assume everything will sort itself out. What we know now is that the problem was very little to do with market protections. Not that I'm saying that we didn't have market protections, and nor am I saying that we were productive producers in every part of the economy at that time. But what I am saying is that those things turned out to be well down the list of issues as to reasons for stagflation. In the 1970s, there were a series of price jumps for oil. I'm not talking a 20% increase here, I'm talking huge jumps. The price more than doubled in the 1973 jump, and then it more than doubled again in 1979. At the peak, oil was more than 5 times the price in the early 1970s. The huge rise in the price of oil, which was an input into the production of so many things in the economy, meant that the production costs of all those things rose as well, and this was a strong driver of inflation. At the same time, unionism's strength had grown and grown following the post-war years, and by the 70s they were extremely strong. They had spent years and years getting better pay and working conditions for the workers, and they were in no mood to reverse this trend voluntarily at the peak of their strength. However, with the price rises brought on by oil, and with wages not willing to drop to compensate for the decreased profitability, the companies faced an inability to even maintain enough capital spending to stay at constant levels of productivity, and so with productivity starting to drop, the companies were starting to go broke and closing down and putting people out of work. Economic growth was low and inflation was high. This was stagflation. How should have the problem been resolved? Sometimes, even though we normally like market pricing, it is better to take it out of that system and introduce manual pricing, which is what the Australian government should have done. It also should have introduced rationing of the oil and oil's products, as it is better to have an even and controlled slowdown in the economy than a really imbalanced one. At the same time, the unions should have been willing to calm their wage demands and even been willing to accept hours reductions over the whole workforce. This would have distributed the pain evenly and would have kept everyone still working rather than having a heap of people eventually become unemployed as a result of the problems. The economy would have slowed for a time, but since the purpose of the economy is to serve all the people to make their lives better, it would have been better for everyone to go without a little material consumption for a while, and by a little while I mean several years, than to have started us on the path to the economic ailments we've had as a result of the switch to new classical economics. Those ailments are asset price speculation bubbles, especially housing, unemployment and underemployment steadily rising, wage stagnation, productivity growth slowing, low GDP growth, no inflation, which stifles government tax revenues, which stifles government service provision, which stifles economic productivity, massive private debt burdens, major reductions in the quality of life, firstly for the unemployed, then for the lower socioeconomic employed people, and now for the lower middle class. Huge inequality, which exacerbates almost every other human issue, ranging from violence to obesity to recycling to infant mortality. And finally, a resistance to attempting to solve our big environmental problems, most notably climate change. Besides these ailments, we're also finding that many of the things that new classical economics is based on, like interest rates, obviously don't work the way they were thought to. Interest rates are being cut but not inducing growth. Plus, a number of countries are already into negative interest rate territory, and still people are willing to buy their debt. Who knew that one? Despite super low interest rates around the world, inflation is heading below the lower limit of many central banks' targets. So the situation is just like what's happened before, where it's time to throw out an old and ineffective economics and bring in a new and more effective one, which I hope will be modern monetary economics. Thanks for watching and listening.